afternoon, students. In today's class, we are going to learn about properties of acid. If you remember, in my previous classes, I have started the chapter called acid, bases and salt. First, we did the definition of acids, old and new definitions, and I said you to go with the new definition. Then I showed you the 6 classification of acid, after which we learned the preparation of acid in the last class. So we have finished definition of acid, classification of acid, and preparation of acid. In today's class, we are going to learn the properties of acid. And do remember, student, this property of acid is very important because it is linked with 4 chapters in your ICSE syllabus. So if you learn nicely the properties of acid, it is going to help you in the chapter called acid, bases and salt, number 1. Number 2, the chapter called hydrogen chloride. Number 3, the chapter called sulfuric acid. Number 4, the chapter called nitric acid. Even you get the help in organic chemistry when you study about acetic acid. So therefore, this is utmost important, properties of acid, and from here every year question comes. Now you can see these are the properties of acid. There are 7, but I have shown you only 6 here. In the next slide you will be seeing other properties of it. So number 1 property of acid you should remember is they have sour taste. Acids have sour taste. Okay, what kind of taste acid has? Sour taste. Number 2 property, it turns blue litmus paper red. Always remember, student, acid turns blue litmus paper red. And base turns opposite, red to blue. But many student has confusion in this, red to blue, blue to red. So remember this word from today, BAR, bar. Here, this A stands for acid. Okay, A stands for acid, blue to red. So always remember, acid turns blue litmus paper red. So if acid turns blue litmus paper red, then the base turns red to blue. Then base turns red to blue, opposite. So if you remember bar, you remember about acid turns blue to red, and make it opposite, that becomes for base. Next, number 3 property we'll see is acid have basicity. As I said you, basicity means the number of hydrogen ion or hydronium ion produced on dissociation of an acid, which I explained you yesterday. So the number of hydrogen ion or hydronium ion produced on dissociation of an acid gives you basicity. For example, HCl, when it breaks, it produces 1 hydrogen ion, so its basicity is 1. Sulfuric acid produces 2 hydrogen ion. When dissolved in water, it produces 2 hydronium ions, so sulfuric acid basicity is 2. Similarly, for phosphoric acid, formula H3PO4, it will produce 3 hydrogen ion, or when it dissolves in water, it produces 3 hydronium ion, therefore its basicity is 3. And do remember the word which I said you in my last class, ABA. Acid has basicity, base has acidity. So do remember, acid has basicity. Number 4 property, acid reacts with metals to produce hydrogen gas, and this gas has pop sound. Acid reacts with metal to produce hydrogen gas, which has pop sound. Now, to give you example of this, I am here. Okay, one example of metal can be given as your zinc. Zinc is a metal. Now, it is reacting with acid like sulfuric acid. Whenever acid reacts with metal, okay, hydrogen gas is displaced, H2 will come out, and zinc and sulfate will combine to form zinc sulfate. So whenever any acid reacts with metal, it liberates hydrogen gas, and this gas has pop sound. So always remember, students, acid reacts with metal to produce hydrogen gas, which has a pop sound, and this is one of the property of acid. But do remember, student, all metal does not react with acid to produce hydrogen gas. To know about it, first we have to see this reactivity series of metal. This series is there in class 7, even in 8, even in 9, even in 10. And this series, if you learn, it's going to help you in 2 chapters. Number 1 is acid, bases and salt chapter. Number 2 in the chapter called electrolysis in the class 10 syllabus. So students, do remember the reactivity series of metals. Okay, the metals which are above are highly reactive, the metal which is below are less reactive. So reactivity series is that series in which metals are arranged in decreasing order of their reactivity. Decreasing order of reactivity means the one which is above is highly reactive, the one which is down is less reactive. So if you see hydrogen is here, And in this reaction, if you see, students, displacement reaction is occurring. Zinc is above hydrogen. You can see zinc is above hydrogen. Therefore, zinc is more reactive. As a result, it displaces hydrogen from acid, whereby it gets evolved. Okay, but all metal does not react with acid to liberate hydrogen gas, as I said you earlier. Example, these all. Because copper, mercury, silver, platinum and gold, they are below hydrogen in the reactivity series. Therefore, they are less reactive than hydrogen. So, whenever you react copper with sulfuric acid, okay, hydrogen gas and copper salt, many will frame the reaction this way: H2 out, CuSO4. But this reaction is not going to occur. Reason: copper is below hydrogen in the reactivity series, therefore it is less reactive than hydrogen. As a result, it cannot displace hydrogen from acid. So do remember, acid reacts with metal to liberate hydrogen gas, no doubt, but not all metals. Only those metals which are above hydrogen is responsible for liberating hydrogen gas from acid, but the metal which is below hydrogen are less reactive, therefore they cannot displace hydrogen from acid, means hydrogen gas will not get liberated. So metal which is below hydrogen, is one of them is copper. So why copper does not liberate hydrogen gas with acid? If the question comes, you have to say copper is below hydrogen in the reactivity series, due to which it is less reactive and cannot displace hydrogen from acid. So do remember, only the acid which is above metals which is above hydrogen are able to displace hydrogen from acid, but the metal which is below, they can't. But it doesn't mean that copper and sulfuric acid does not react. Many students has this confusion. Oh, copper does not react with sulfuric acid to liberate hydrogen gas. True. But these two will react. Okay, these two will react to give you some other compounds like copper sulfate, sulfur dioxide and water. I am not saying that copper and sulfuric acid will not react. They will react. And when copper sulfuric acid reacts, we get copper sulfate, sulfur dioxide and water. But they do not react to produce hydrogen gas. So copper, sulfuric acid, they do react with each other, but they will not liberate hydrogen gas as zinc has done. Why? Because copper is below hydrogen, therefore it is less reactive and cannot displace hydrogen from acid. So this is all about property number 4. Now we go to the property number 5. Acid reacts with base to produce salt and water. And such reaction is called neutralization reaction. Okay, now I am going to explain number 5 to you all. Okay, one of the example of acid is HCl. One of the example of base is sodium hydroxide. This is your acid, this is your base. Acid and base. Now these two is going to react to give you salt and water, and that is actually double decomposition reaction, whereby this Cl will go with Na to form NaCl, and this H and this OH will combine to form water. And this reaction is already balanced, where this is a salt, this is a water. So whenever any acid, students, reacts with base, any acid reacts with base, we get salt and water. Such reaction is known as neutralization reaction. I'll give you one more example. Now this is your sulfuric acid, again reacting with potassium hydroxide, suppose, and again this is acid, this is what? Base. So if it is acid and this is base, what we are supposed to get out here? Salt and water. So first you make it water by yourself. Now what you require here is water you got, now you require here is salt. Acid base gives salt and water. Water has been made, now we have to make here salt. Which salt you will get? Potassium and sulfate is left here, so you get potassium sulfate. And why this 2 is here? Because the valency of sulfate is 2. After that you can balance it. Okay, so when you balance it, you can, it's not that you have to start with oxygen, you can start with any metal or element. So in this case, if I see here is 2 potassium and here is only 1 potassium. So start balancing from potassium, 2 potassium, 2 potassium. Balance hydrogen, 2 here, 2 here, total 4. So 2 2s are 4. Balance sulfur 1, balance. Oxygen, 4 plus 2, 6, 4 plus 2, 6, balance. So do remember, students, any acid reacts with any base to produce salt and water. And such reaction is known as neutralization reaction. Now we go to the property number 6. Acid reacts with metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate to produce salt, water and carbon dioxide gas. And this carbon dioxide gas has Briggs effervescence. This carbon dioxide gas has Briggs effervescence. effervescence. Now let us see how to explain this part, okay? Now look out here. This is your acid, hydrochloric acid, reacting with metal carbonate. And which metal carbonate I have taken here is sodium carbonate, because this is metal carbonate. Even acid reacts with metal bicarbonate. Acid reacts with metal bicarbonate. So this is metal carbonate, this is metal bicarbonate. So whenever any acid reacts with either metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate, you get here is carbon dioxide gas and water. You get here is carbon dioxide gas and water. The two products are same. So any acid reacts with either metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate, you get carbon dioxide and water. Along with that, you are supposed to get here salt. So if you see here, sodium and chlorine is left. So what you get here is sodium chloride. Similarly, here also sodium and chlorine is left. So what you get here is sodium chloride. Reactants are different, but all the three products are same here. So do remember, from now on, any acid reacts with metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate, you are going to get is salt, carbon dioxide and water. And this carbon dioxide is a gas, and it gives Brix effervescence, the bubble coming up. If you have seen in cold drink, whenever we take cold drink like Coca-Cola, Fanta, whatever it is, bubbles comes up, that is actually carbon dioxide. In aerated water drinks, bubbles comes up, that is actually carbon dioxide. Okay, and that bubbles is known by the name Brix effervescence. So always remember, carbonate gives carbon dioxide, which has a Brix effervescence. Now you can do the same reaction with other acids also. So if I have to do out here with nitric acid, everything will be same, but the salt will be sodium nitrate. So just replace chlorine with NO3. So again the reaction is same. You just have to replace chlorine with nitrate ion. Again, this is also acid reacting with metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate to produce carbon dioxide, water and what? Salt. Clear? And again, in place of nitrate, you can take sulfate also by taking sulfuric acid. And if you take sulfuric acid, everything will be same again, but the salt which you get is sodium sulfate and sodium sulfate. So here you get is sodium sulfate, here you get is sodium sulfate. In earlier case, chlorine valency is 1, even the nitrate is 1, so there was no number in sodium. But sulfate valency is 2, so when you cross, you have to write 2 here. So the formula of sodium sulfate is Na2SO4. So from these three examples, you should understand any acid reacts with metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate to produce carbon dioxide, water and salt. If you take here HCl, you get sodium chloride, both the cases. If you take your nitric acid, you get sodium nitrate. If you take sulfuric acid, you get sodium sulfate. So this is all about property number 6. Now we go to the property number 7. Acid reacts with metal sulfite and metal bisulfite to produce salt, water and sulfur dioxide gas. And this sulfur dioxide gas has suffocating odor. Okay. Now to explain number 7, I am going out here again. Now any acid reacts with metal sulfite or metal bisulfite to produce salt, water and sulfur dioxide gas, and that has suffocating odor. Now see the trick which I am doing out here. It was carbonate earlier, isn't it? Now I am just replacing C with sulfur. Now it became sulfite and bisulfite. Sulfite means SO3, bisulfite means HSO3. So if you see here, I have just replaced C with S, that is carbon with sulfur. So here also you do the same thing, you just replace C with S. So instead of carbon dioxide, now it will become sulfur dioxide. And this sulfur dioxide gas has suffocating odor or suffocating smell. Suffocating smell. So students, any acid reacts with metal sulfite or metal bisulfite to produce sulfur dioxide, water and salt, and this sulfur dioxide gas has suffocating odor. And it's not that metal which you have to take is always sodium here. In place of sodium, you can even take potassium. And now it became potassium sulfite and potassium bisulfite. So just remember, everything will be just same. Just replace sodium with whom? Potassium. Okay, because potassium is also metal like sodium. Now this reaction again is with respect to what? Sulfuric acid. If you have to make the same reaction with respect to nitric acid, just replace sulfate ion with nitrate. If you do so, instead of sulfate here, what will come? Nitrate. And nitrate valency is 1, so you will not get Na2 here like this. Similarly, if I replace this acid with hydrochloric acid, then both the places, here will be HCl, and here instead of NO3, Cl will come, and you get here is KCl. So if you use your sodium, you get NaCl. So any acid reacts with metal sulfide or metal bisulfide to give you sulfur dioxide, water and salt. And do remember, sulfur dioxide has suffocating odor. And these properties usually comes in, okay, what do you observe question, even in where you have to mention the colors or the smell, and it even come in write down the balance equation form, sometime to identify anion, okay, which anion. So that I'm going to discuss later. Now we go to the property number 8. Acid reacts with metal sulfide to produce salt and hydrogen sulfide gas. The formula of hydrogen sulfide gas is H2S. And this gas has rotten egg smell. Now I am going to explain you property number 8 of acid. Now you can see here, this is iron sulfide. Sulfide symbol is simply S. Sulfate is SO4, sulfite is SO3, and sulfide is simply S. Do remember, this is your sulfate, this is your sulfite, and this is your sulfide. So if you see the last letter ATE, 8, sulfate, SO4, sulfite, SO3, sulfide is simply S. So this is iron sulfide we say. Okay, we say it as ferrous sulfide or iron sulfide. You can even say iron sulfide or ferrous sulfide, and in ferrous the valency of iron is 2, so we say iron 2 sulfide. Now this I am going to react with acid like sulfuric acid. So when I react these two, students, this will come out, and you get here is H2S, which has a rotten egg smell, hydrogen sulfide gas. Along with that, here is left is Fe and SO4, so you get ferrous sulfate. So any metal sulfide, any metal, here I have taken iron, reacts with sulfuric acid to liberate hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotten egg smell. Okay, another example, this is again zinc sulfide. I am reacting with HCl, hydrochloric acid. I'm just replacing another acid now here. So again, in these two reacts, we get here is hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotten egg smell, because any metal sulfide will give you rotten egg smell of hydrogen sulfide gas. Now to balance, here is 2H, so put here 2H, so it became H2S, H2S balance. Now what is left here? Z and zinc is left, and here how many chlorine is left? 2. So you get here is zinc chloride. So do remember, any metal sulfide reacts with acid to liberate hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotten egg smell. So these are the 8 properties of acid you need to remember, students, and it's going to help you in 4 chapters around, okay, and it comes every year in ICSE board exam. So I like to repeat all the properties again to you all. Number 1 property, do remember, acid have sour taste. They turn blue litmus paper red. BAR, A means acid, blue to red. Base will be opposite, red to blue. Next, it reacts with metal to liberate hydrogen gas. But all metal does not do so. Only the metal which is above hydrogen in the reactivity series will liberate hydrogen gas when it reacts with acid. Acid has basicity. Acid reacts with base to produce salt and water. Such reaction is known by the name neutralization reaction. Acid reacts with metal sulfide and metal bisulfide to produce sulfur dioxide gas, water and salt, which has sulfur dioxide gas has suffocating odor. Acid reacts with metal carbonate and metal bicarbonate to produce salt, carbon dioxide and water, and the carbon dioxide evolves as Briggs effervescence. Acid reacts with metal sulfide to produce hydrogen sulfide gas and salt, and this hydrogen sulfide gas has rotten egg smell. You need to remember all of this. So these are the 8 properties which is highly important, students, so do remember it. Now we will see some questions related to whatever properties we have learned so far. Number 1, identify the following anion. This is the question pattern of ISC. Okay, I have seen such questions, so I am dealing with you right now. Identify the following anion. So you have to read the question properly. An anion on reaction with dilute acid gives Briggs effervescence. That means where you have heard about this in the properties of acid. So acid is reacting to give you Briggs effervescence, and this Briggs effervescence is of whose? Carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is produced from carbonate. So the anion present out here is what? Carbonate ion. Carbonate ion, formula CO3 minus 2 the valency. So I repeat again, acid reacts with X to give you Briggs effervescence, and this Briggs effervescence is always of carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is produced from which anion? Carbonate. So anion will be carbonate ion, formula CO3 minus 2. Next, the anion Y on reaction with dilute acid gives suffocating smell. Again, acid is giving suffocating smell, means you have to remember the property of acid. Okay, and this suffocating smell is of what? Carbon dioxide. Sorry, sulfur dioxide. Therefore, this anion Y will be sulfate ion. Sulfate ion, SO3 minus 2. Again, the property of acid. Or you can even write bisulfite ion, because both produce sulfur dioxide gas. And here also, instead of carbonate ion, you can even write bicarbonate, HCO3 minus ion. And do remember, carbonate is minus 2 valency, bicarbonate is minus 1. Similarly, sulfide is minus 2 and bisulfide is minus 1. So the anion which gives Briggs effervescence is carbonate or bicarbonate. Anion which gives suffocating smell is sulfide or bisulfide. Now we go to the third one. An anion Z on reaction with dilute acid gives rotonic smell. Now this rotonic smell you have heard, okay, and this is the smell of hydrogen sulfide, because hydrogen sulfide gas has rotonic smell. Now, which anion reacts with dilute acid to give you this? Metal sulfide. In metal sulfide, who is anion? Sulfide. So therefore, the answer for this anion will be what? Sulfate ion. Okay, Z is sulfate ion, S minus 2. So this is how we can identify. There are many other anions. Such questions are set from that anions also, that we will see in due course of time. Right now, whatever property we have learned, with respect to that, I have shown you some questions related to how to identify anion. Now we go to this question, what do you observe? Always remember, student, when the question comes, what do you observe? You need to mention either the smell or the color. You don't have to show the reaction. Sodium bicarbonate reacts with dilute sulfuric acid. Now tell me here, dilute sulfuric acid is what? Actually acid. And now we have to recall the property of acid. Acid, when reacts with metal carbonate or metal bicarbonate, carbonate, it produces carbon dioxide gas. And that carbon dioxide gas has what kind of observation you observe? Briggs effervescence. So the answer will be Briggs effervescence. Briggs effervescence of carbon dioxide gas is evolved. Okay. Next one, number 2. Metal sulfide reacts with dilute HCl. Again, this hydrochloric acid is reacting with metal sulfide. Sulfide means SO3, and sulfide gives you SO2. You get sulfur dioxide gas, which has what kind of smell? Suffocating smell. So you have to say suffocating smell of sulfur dioxide gas will evolve. Third question, zinc sulfide reacts with dilute sulfuric acid. Again, this is your acid. Now this acid is reacting with metal sulfide. Metal sulfide. Sulfide always gives you hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotonic smell. So the answer will be rotonic smell. Rotonic smell of hydrogen sulfide gas is evolved. Okay, so these are the two patterns. Number 1, you have to identify anion. This is how you're going to identify if you know the properties of acid. Next question is what do you observe, where you have to either predict the smell or the colors. And third variety of question from this property comes usually in balancing the equation. So any base reacts with any acid to produce salt and water. Maximum acid reacts with metal to liberate hydrogen gas. Metal bicarbonate, it reacts with acid to give you carbon dioxide gas, water and salt. Metal sulfide and metal bisulfide reacts with acid to give you sulfur dioxide gas, water and salt, whereas metal sulfide reacts with acid to give you hydrogen sulfide gas, which has a rotonic smell. So do remember these 8 properties of acid. It's very, very important, students, and it's going to help you in 4 chapters. I'm saying repeatedly because it's surely very important. Now we will see is the uses of acid. Okay, there are many uses of acid in which I have shown you some out here. Keep this in mind. Okay, conc HCl is used to extract glue from bones. Do remember, concentrated hydrochloric acid is used to extract glue from bones. Concentrated hydrochloric acid is even used for pickling of metals. Now what is the meaning of pickling? First, I guess you all have learned galvanization process in lower classes, in class 8, 9. What is galvanization? It is a process in which we coat the metal surface with zinc. So when you coat metal surface with zinc, that is called galvanization. Suppose you want to coat iron with zinc. Why? Because iron, when it comes in contact with air and moisture, gets rusted. So to prevent it from rusting, we coat it with zinc. And that process is called galvanization. But before plating iron with zinc, we have to clean the surface of iron. Then only we will plate with zinc. So when you clean the surface of any metal before plating with zinc, that cleaning process is called pickling. So that is done by conc HCl. So if you want to plate iron with zinc, you cannot coat it directly. First, you have to clean the surface of iron with conc HCl, and that process is called pickling, after which we coat it with zinc. Number 3 use. Conc sulfuric acid is used as laboratory reagent. You have seen already in my previous class, we prepare volatile acid from non-volatile acid. Volatile acid like hydrochloric acid, volatile acid like nitric acid can be prepared from sulfuric acid. Not only these two acid, but there are many other chemicals which can be prepared from concentrated sulfuric acid. Therefore, it is used in many reactions. Therefore, it is used as laboratory reagent. And it is even used as dehydrating agent, the one who removes water. So do remember, dehydrating agent means to remove water, okay? And sulfuric acid always helps to remove water. Let us see one example of it. So I'm with the use number 3, I'm going to explain you a little bit about dehydrating agent. The formula of cane sugar is C12H22O11. This is the formula of cane sugar, okay, which we even call it by the name sucrose. And you know this is white, or you can say transparent in color. Now I am going to put conc sulfuric acid concentrated, which act as a dehydrating agent. What is the job of dehydrating agent? To remove water. Water formula is H2O, that means it contains hydrogen and oxygen. So remove these two from here, hydrogen and oxygen. So once you, this is a dehydrating agent, so it removes water, so remove hydrogen and oxygen, because the component of water is hydrogen and oxygen. So if you remove this, what is left with you? Carbon. How many carbon is left? 12 carbon balance. And what it has to remove is water. Now balance it. Here is 22 hydrogen. So if I put here 11 to the 22 hydrogen balance, 11 oxygen balance. And this carbon is black in color. So students, do remember sugar, when you put conc sulfuric acid to it, it turns black, because conc sulfuric acid, being dehydrating agent, removes water from it and converts it to carbon, which is black in color. And this question even comes in what do you observe. So what do you observe when we add conc sulfuric acid to cane sugar? It turns black due to the formation of carbon. And which property of sulfuric acid you are observing here? Because it is showing dehydrating property. And this is about use number 3. Now we go to the use number 4. Conc nitric acid is used to prepare fertilizer like ammonium nitrate and explosive like trinitrotoluene. Okay, trinitrotoluene is abbreviated as TNT. TNT. The T stands for tri, N stands for nitro, T stands for toluene. So trinitrotoluene. Trinitrotoluene. So do remember, nitric acid is used as fertilizer like to make fertilizer like ammonium nitrate, and to prepare explosive like trinitrotoluene, abbreviated as TNT. Number fifth use of another acid is acetic acid. Acetic acid is also known by the name vinegar, which we use in day-to-day life. Okay, so do remember acetic acid, which is also known by the name vinegar. It is used as food preservatives. To preserve food, we use acetic acid. And students, do remember these all five are not the only use. There are many others. You can go through your textbook to find other uses of other acids also. But these are the important ones which I have shown you here about the uses of acid. So if you see in my class of today's, what I have discussed with you is properties of acid and uses of acid. So students, in my last three classes, I have started the chapter called acid, bases and salt, and in these three classes of mine, I have explained you only about acid portion. And what we have learned? Definition of acid, old and new, classifications of acid, preparation of acid, properties of acid, and uses of acid. So acid is done. So in my next class when I come, I am going to teach you about base. Similarly for base also, we will learn first the definition, then the classification, then the preparation, then properties, then uses. After which I'll shift over to salt. Thank you very much for today. Okay, be safe, stay home. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, we are doing with the process of absorption by roots. Now, so far we have finished the two process. One is the diffusion, another one is the osmosis. Yesterday we discussed about how do plant absorb water and minerals by the process of osmosis, and we came to know what is endoosmosis and exoosmosis. Now we will be heading towards turgidity, and in the turgidity, first of all, the root hair, when it absorbs the water gets infiltrated inside the cytoplasm. Now due to this water will exert a pressure, okay, and the phenomenon that results in the firmness of the cell, the firmness of the plant is considered to be rigid because of endoosmosis, and that leads to turgidity. So what is turgidity? Definition: the outward pressure exerted on the cell wall by the cell content. Now take for instance a plant, okay, root. Now if you try to see the cell of this plant, then when the root hairs absorb the water and minerals, this water and minerals are directed inside the cell. So inside the cell, what will happen? This water will exert a pressure on the either side of the cell wall, and due to that the cell remains firm, the cell remains rigid, okay. The state in which the cell remain rigid, firm, okay, we can call it as firm, that condition is called as turgid, okay, the condition is called as turgid. So this turgid condition is due to which pressure? Turgor pressure, okay. The turgor pressure was due to endoosmosis. So why endoosmosis? Because you see the water got infiltrated, okay. So this is the root here. Inside the root, what got What got infiltrated? The solvent molecule, that is the water, got infiltrated inside. Due to that, now when water got infiltrated inside, you call it as endoosmosis. Due to that, the cell volume will increase. When the water got infiltrated inside, it creates a pressure. That pressure is called as turgor pressure. This turgor pressure leads to the condition called as turgid. The state in which this turgor pressure remains and the cell is said to remain in a turgid condition is only called as turgidity. It is called as turgidity. So here you see, and due to that, cell wall by the cell contains cell sap in a fully distended cell. So when I say distended cell, just imagine that when the water got infiltrated inside, this root hairs become formed in nature. Okay, this extended part of the cell root hair, the cell of this plant, or the root, the cell of this root hair, when it has got fully stretched, then you call it as distended cell, is termed as which pressure? You call it as turgor pressure. The plant cell in this state is said to be turgid. That means when the plant is formed, okay, when the plant is formed in nature, then you call it as turgid. And such a condition to remain in the formless state is only called as turgidity. Now, at the same time, you also have to keep it in mind, like suppose say this is cell wall. Okay, first of all, when the endoosmosis took place, during that time, this cell wall, which is made up of cellulose, okay, which is made up of cellulose, is hard enough, is rigid enough. So automatically, due to endoosmosis, when the pressure is created, the pressure will be created on the wall of this cell wall, and due to that, what will happen? It will counter attack. It will try to build up a pressure inward towards the solvent, towards the cell content. When the pressure due to the cell content is only called as turgor pressure. That means the cell wall will exert a pressure. The content inside the cell leads to a pressure. The pressure enacted by the cell wall results in which pressure? Results in turgor pressure. And due to that, the cell is considered to remain in turgid condition. To remain in the state of turgid is only called as turgidity. So it is due to this turgidity, the plant remains erect. Okay, and there are few importance of this turgidity. First of all is that it is due to this turgidity the plant absorbs water and minerals. Another thing is that the shape of this plant, okay, the shape of the plant, the shape of each and every part of this plant, okay, whether it is root, whether it is shoot, whether it is leaf, okay, the leaf shape is maintained. Okay, the leaf shape is maintained due to the turgor pressure, due to the turgidity condition. If by exoosmosis, if water comes out, okay, from the cell, if the water comes out, automatically this cell will shrink. Okay, this cell will, water content, when the water comes out from the cell, it will shrink. This will lead to wilting of the plant. Okay, this will lead to wilting of the plant. So when I say wilting of the plant, what will happen? The plant will shrivel. That means this leaf will lose its shape. Finally, you will find the leaf shrivels off. Shriveling of this leaf, wilting of this leaf is because the water has withdrawn from each and every part of the cell. That means when the turgor pressure decreases, it will lead to the turgidity gets over, and that condition you call it as flaccid condition. Okay, you call it as flaccid condition. So when I say flaccid, you just have to understand the opposite of turgid. Opposite of turgid is flaccid. Now when the plant shrivels off, the leaf, you see that it has lost its shape. Okay, when the plants or uprooted plant when it is uprooted, okay, the plant shrivels up, it loses its shape, the leaf loses its shape, okay. The condition, this condition is called as flaccid condition. The flaccid condition resulted due to what? It resulted due to exoosmosis. And the condition for exoosmosis can be innumerable factors. Suppose, say for example, if the soil is not well irrigated, or the factors can be either it can be scorching heat, okay, thereby what will happen, number of factors are there that may lead to exoosmosis. When there is a withdrawal of water from the cell, from the plant body, the plant may shrivel, the plant may go under wilting condition, and that is due to exoosmosis. This condition, that means when the turgor pressure decreases, it leads to which condition? Flaccid condition. And to remain in the state of flaccid condition, we use the term called as flaccidity. We use the term called as flaccidity. That means opposite of turgidity. Okay, opposite of turgidity will be flaccidity. Opposite of turgid will be flaccid condition. So it is due to turgidity and flaccidity of the cell. These are some of the phenomenon that goes during absorption of water and minerals. Now another thing, there are few more importance of this turgidity. One, I told you the shape of the plant, okay, the shape of the parts of the plant, that is the leaf, the root, shoot and all. Next thing is that the germination of a seed, okay, germination of a seed. Importance of turgidity is that germination of a seed, the seed has a seed coat, okay. When this seed is germinated, then you will find that it swells up. Why it swells up? Because water infiltrates inside. How the water infiltrates inside will come to the next part of it. But when the water gets infiltrated inside, it builds up a turgor pressure, and due to that, what will happen? It leads to the germination of the seed also. At the same time, you will also come across that in turgidity, most of the plant, like you will come across plant like touch me not. Okay, touch me not plant. That is, okay, the application of this turgidity, if you see touch me not plant, that is Mimosa pudica. Here also you see that when you touch this plant or leaf, okay, what will happen? The leaf automatically close. When you touch this plant, the leaf automatically close. This is thigmonastic movement. But actually, how do this leaf close? The leaf close because the turgor pressure decreases. It is due to the turgor pressure, due to that the leaf are open. But when you come in, when you touch this plant, the turgor pressure decreases. That means the water, where does it goes? It goes to one of the structure in the plant that is called as pulvinus. When the water happens to go to the pulvinus region, then automatically what will happen? The turgor pressure of the leaf decreases. Due to that, the leaf closes up. And at the same time again, when the turgor pressure is regained, then automatically again you will come across the leaf open. So this mechanism of thigmonastic movement in the plant is observed, and the phenomenon is nothing but it is due to turgidity or turgor pressure. Now, at the same time you will come across most of the plant, when the root elongates, they go to the innermost layer of the soil. They penetrate the soil layer. This penetration in the soil is also due to the turgor pressure, is also due to the turgor pressure, and the turgor pressure, due to this turgor pressure, the root remains firm and it can easily penetrate the soil. It can go in search of the water. This root hairs, when you just pull it out, it's so delicate in nature, but you will find that even in the hard crust of the earth also, this root is able to penetrate it. It is all due to the turgor pressure. Another part, what is another importance of this turgidity is that the opening and closing of stomata. Opening and closing of stomata. Okay, stomata, they are present on the leaf, and from here there is a exchange of gases. Exchange of gases meaning carbon dioxide gas inside the leaf, carbon dioxide gas inside the leaf, and oxygen comes out. At the same time, excess of water also comes outside. So here you see that the opening of this stomata, okay, this is the stomata open. Stomata open. These are the guard cells. Guard cells. So when these guard cells become turgid, a turgor pressure results in the opening of this stomata. So when the stomata opens, what happens? Oxygen comes out, carbon dioxide gets inside, and at the same time most of the water molecule are also released from the pores from the stomata. This mechanism of the exchange of gases is also due to turgor pressure. It is also due to turgidity. So sometimes what happens in the examination when it comes, like what are the importance of turgidity? The firmness in the plant, the shape of the parts of the plant, that is the leaf, root, each and every part of the plant, okay, the flowers, each and every part is due to turgor pressure, and to remain in that state you call it as turgidity. Second point is that it also helps in the germination of seed. At the same time, opening and closing of stomata is due to the turgor pressure, due to turgidity. Okay, the root is able to penetrate the soil is also due to the turgor pressure, and also the thigmonastic movement on the touch, the plant is able to open and close. That is also due to the turgor pressure. Now, moving to the next one, we have imbibition. So what do we mean by imbibition? First of all, the definition. Okay, imbibition may be defined. Imbibition may be defined as a phenomenon in which the living or dead cells of the plant. Okay, first of all, the dead cell of the plant. Cell, you have the vacuole. Okay, this is the cell wall. Cell wall, vacuole, cytoplasm. So here, when I say cell wall, then cell wall is made up of cellulose. Cellulose. This cellulose is the hard part. Is the hard part, is the dead part. Okay. So here, in which the living or dead cells of the plant. Living is the cell membrane. This one is the cell membrane. Okay. Living or dead cells of the plant in the dry or semi-dry state absorb water by surface attraction. That means if this cell wall, a cell membrane, when they absorb water by surface attraction, okay, created due to the presence of hygroscopic constituent. Now, what do you mean by hygroscopic constituent? The cell wall is made up of cellulose. Similarly, there are so many other type of plant. Okay, the seed, okay, the hard part of the plant, they are either made up of cellulose, they are either made up of pectin, suberin, okay, suberin, hemicellulose, okay, hemicellulose. These are some of the hygroscopic constituent. Now what do you mean by hygroscopic constituent? This hygroscopic constituent means that they absorb water, okay, such as cellulose, hemicellulose, even the pectin, okay, pectin material of the cell wall, okay, depending upon the type of plant. It's not that all the cell wall contains cellulose, okay. These are the hygroscopic constituent. Now what do they do when the water is absorbed by them, okay, either due to the hydrostatic pressure, okay, due to water pressure, hydrostatic pressure, okay, hydrostatic pressure, water builds up a pressure on the hygroscopic constituent. Due to that, whatever the force that is exerted inside the cell wall, inside the cell membrane, inside the cytoplasm, you use the term called as imbibition. That means when the water imbibes, that means the hygroscopic constituents absorbs the water, that is called as imbibing, imbibes. Then it leads to the phenomenon that is called as imbibition. So it is one of the process of absorption by root, that is water and minerals. When the plant is absorbing this water and minerals, one of the process that is imbibition, that means water gets imbibes. And in that case, again I repeat about the definition. Imbibition may be defined as a phenomenon in which the living or dead cells of the plant, okay, even the living or the dead cells of the plant in the dry or semi-dry state, whether they are fully dried up or whether they are in semi-dry condition, they absorb water. So water literally doesn't only mean that soil water, okay, it can be the water present in the moisture also. This moisture water, when they are being absorbed by the plant body, and in the plant body also, what material absorbs the water, you have to understand, it is the hygroscopic constituents. And how do they absorb? Absorbs by surface attraction, okay. So when I say surface attraction, take for example any part of the thing, here the water from every side, when it is surrounding it, that means this is being imbibed on the surface part of it. Then what will happen? Created due to the presence of hygroscopic constituent such as, I told you, cellulose, hemicellulose, pectin material of the cell wall, it leads to imbibition. And you see that in number of time, you must have seen, especially during the monsoon period, the wooden door, the windows, they get jammed, okay. You cannot lock it properly. What actually it has happened? The moisture has got imbibed on the wooden door. Due to that, it does not get into the frame. Similarly, you will come across that whenever the seed are put into a container, and if water or moisture is present inside, automatically the lid gets opened. These are all due to imbibition. Due to imbibition, it results in turgor pressure, and due to that, what will happen? The lids gets open. These are some of the phenomenal things that happens due to imbibition. Now, next, come to the next part, that is called as plasmolysis. Okay. So which part to call as plasma? Okay. The other name of this cell membrane is also called as plasma. Is also called as plasma membrane. So here when I say plasmolysis, okay, the word plasmolysis, that means the plasma layer gets split. Okay, the plasma layer gets split. So let's see the definition. The shrinkage of the cytoplasm and the cell membrane when the cell is immersed in a highly concentrated solution from the cell wall is called as plasmolysis, and the cell is said to be plasmolysed. That means here what will happen? This the cytoplasm, that is, this part is the cytoplasm. Okay, here the cytoplasm. So there is a shrinking of this cytoplasm. That means this cytoplasm will shrink, and due to that, what will happen? This cell membrane also will be pulled inward, detaching from the detaching from the cell wall. Detaching from the cell wall. That means from the cell wall, first of all the cell membrane and the cytoplasm. So initially you will come across that what results in the pooling of the cell membrane. Then the first of all the cytoplasm will shrink, pulling up the cell membrane, and due to that the cell membrane gets fully moved away from the cell wall. This phenomenon you call it as plasmolysis. So again I repeat out here, you see the shrinkage of the cytoplasm. First of all the cytoplasm will shrink, it will become less, it will squeeze. Okay, when the cell is immersed in highly concentrated solution. So when I say when a cell is put in a highly concentrated solution, when I say highly concentrated solution, we use the term called as hypotonic solution. In a hypotonic solution, okay, take for example, when we are taking anything, okay, any part of the living cells, tissues, okay, or take for example any fruits or something like that, we put in a sugary syrup, then what will happen? It will shrink. So that shrinking, actually initially inside the cell what happened? If I am talking about an organism, if I am talking about a resin, then a grape, then you will come across it is made up of many cells. So actually what happens to the cell? Okay, there is a shrinkage of cytoplasm. This leads to number of phenomenal things in the living organism. Suppose say for example, if whole this cell will shrink, then it will lead to wilting. Suppose say for example, if the bacteria comes in the contact with the hypotonic solution, the organisms die due to exoosmosis. But actually what happens to the cell? There is a shrinkage of the cytoplasm. So how it happens? Let's see in the next slide. Okay, here in this diagram I have taken a normal turgid cell. Okay, normal turgid cell. This part is the vacuole, cytoplasm, okay, few cellular organelles are there, nucleus. Now in this case, if you try to see this part, then this is the normal and this is the turgid cell. The cell is swelled up. Okay, now when this cell is put in a hypotonic solution, okay, then first of all what actually happens in the cell? Then what you will find? There is a shrinkage of the cytoplasm. Okay, this part the cytoplasm from the corner end it is shrinking. Okay, you see from the corner end it is shrinking. What do we use the term? We use the term called as incipient. What do you mean by incipient? Incipient means that starting of plasmolysis, beginning of plasmolysis, okay, is called as incipient plasmolysis. If that cell is still in that condition, in that hypotonic solution, if what will happen? If more excess of water starts coming out, excess of this universal solvent starts coming out from the cell, then finally what will happen? Whole of the cytoplasm will shrink. Okay, whole of the cytoplasm will shrink. You see a huge gap is formed. Okay, space filled with external hypotonic solution. That means this area has been filled with more hypotonic solution. Hypotonic solution has withdrawn. What it will lead to? It will lead to permanent plasmolysis. Now when the one cell totally fully shrinks, then finally just imagine that if it is a multicellular organism, okay, if it is a multicellular organism, if it is a plant, and if you put salt, the whole plant will wilt. The whole plant wilted because of permanent plasmolysis. Each of the cell has undergone permanent plasmolysis. But initially you have to understand, first when you are adding the salt, what will happen? Slowly in a cell, one cell, another cell, what will happen? First incipient plasmolysis will take place. Then after that, when that cell remains for a longer period of time, you call it as permanent plasmolysis. This plasmolysis will lead to the wilting of the plant. Or if it is in the case of microorganism, if you put any type of microorganism, yesterday I told you one of the example that when we gargle with salt water, then most of the bacteria are killed. how they are killed. Since when we are talking about bacteria, there are unicellular organism made up of one cell, so they get killed because cytoplasm shrinks, and that is due to plasmolysis. The phenomenon that lead to the death of this microorganism when they come in contact with the salt water was due to plasmolysis. But here you have to understand, whole of these microorganisms, they die due to the process called as exoosmosis, because the water content moves away from their body. That you call it as exoosmosis. Shrinking of the cytoplasm is called as plasmolysis. Okay. Now, in this, now suppose say for example, this permanent plasmolysis, a cell is shrinked, a cell undergoes permanent plasmolysis. Now suppose say for example, again take this cell which has got shrinked fully. Okay, the vacuole has shrinked, the nucleus is there. Okay, now this is the condition of the cell. Okay, this is permanent plasmolysis. Permanent plasmolysis. Now this cell was due to hypertonic solution. Now if this cell is again put back into a normal water, okay, again if you put back into a normal water, hypertonic solution, again you put back into a hypertonic solution, what will happen? Again this cell will become turgid in nature. Okay, again this cell will become, again this cell will regain its shape and size. That means you see the cell has shrunken. Okay, there is a shrinkage of cell because you have put in the hypertonic solution. Now if you put back in the normal water, okay, in the normal water, or you can say that you are putting in a hypotonic solution, again what will happen? After that again the cell will come back to its original shape and size. What do you use the term? You use the term called as deplasmolysis. Is overwriting out here, I will just rub and, okay, we use the term called as deplasmolysis. That means opposite of plasmolysis is deplasmolysis. Plasmolysis, when you keep any of the cell content in a hypertonic solution, cytoplasm will shrink. First of all, there is a shrinkage of the cytoplasm from the corner. You use the term called as incipient plasmolysis. Finally, if that cell is still remain in the hypertonic solution, it will go under permanent plasmolysis. After that, suppose say for example that cell again if you put in the normal water or hypotonic solution, then again what will happen? The cell will again regain its shape and size. It will come back to its original form. Coming back to the original form, you use the term called as what? Deplasmolysis. Like one practical application is that, suppose say for example scorching heat, you have crops grown, all the plant has got wilted, but after that you see that in the evening again when you irrigate the field, okay, when you water them, again the plant come back to its original shape and size, again it's regain its turgidity. What do you use the term? You use the term called as deplasmolysis. Now moving ahead, now there is another part of the process of absorption by root, and you call it as what? Active transport. Okay, what do you mean by active transport? Active transport is that whenever the water molecule, universal solvent, minerals, when they move from one cell to another, okay, when they are moving from one cell to another, then there is a expenditure of energy. Okay, you require the energy to make this universal cell solvent move from one cell to another. Wherever there is a expenditure of energy, we use the what type of transport we call it? We call it as active transport. Okay, we call it as active transport. Like how you see the definition, it is the passage of substance from its lower concentration to higher concentration using energy from the cell through a living cell membrane. From a cell membrane, when these chemical substances, when this water has to be moved from one cell to another cell, from lower concentration to higher concentration, during that time there is a expenditure of energy, there is a requirement of energy. This energy, from where it comes? Obviously you have to understand the energy currency of a cell is mitochondria. Mitochondria releases the energy in the form of ATP. Okay, it releases the energy in the form of ATP. This adenosine triphosphate is the energy currency of a cell. When this energy is released, due to that what will happen? The solvent molecule, okay, from lower concentration to is from low it moves to the high. Take for example, I'll give you another I'll make another diagram to make you understand. This, suppose say for example, you have a reservoir out here. Okay, this is A. There is a pipe out here, and then you have another reservoir, this is B. Now the water will, the tap, when you open it, the water starts moving downwards. Okay, the water starts moving on its own from A to B. When the water is moving on its own, okay, you use the term called as passive. But suppose say for example, this was from A to B. But suppose say for example, this water again, okay, this water again, if you want to send from B to A, okay, B to A, if you want to send, then will the water from B will go to A automatically? No. What do you require? You have to connect it to the motor energy, you have to use electrical energy in order to drive this water from B to A. What you have used? You have used energy. Similarly, take for example from one cell to another cell. Okay, and suppose say this is the root hair. Okay, root hair. Now condition can be either, suppose say for example, here both these cells are equal, isotonic. Okay, the condition can be isotonic. Here suppose say this is also isotonic, then automatically you see this is the xylem tissue. Okay, xylem tissue. Now here in the soil also you see the condition is isotonic. This cell is also isotonic, this cell is also isotonic. Now in this case there will be no movement of molecule. Okay, or sometimes the condition may come across, suppose say for example, here suppose this cell is hypotonic. Okay, this cell is hypotonic. This cell is hypotonic. During this condition also what will happen? There will be no movement of molecule. So in that case what will happen? The water needs to move up, the minerals needs to move up. Okay, then only the physiological activity of the plant may take place. Otherwise what will happen? The plant may go under wilting condition. Okay, there are number of phenomena, whether it is in the animal or plant, the condition may be like this. So during this time what will happen? The mitochondria releases the energy, in which what will happen? It makes the access of these molecules move from one cell to another cell with the expenditure of energy. With the expenditure of energy, when this solvent molecule, when this mineral constituent starts moving from one cell to another with the expenditure of energy, what transport you call it? You call it as active transport. Okay. Now I think is the last one, root pressure, another factor that is responsible, okay, another process that is responsible for the root to absorb water and mineral is the root pressure. Okay, root pressure, you say root pressure is the pressure exerted by the cells of the cortex of the root upon their liquid content under a fully turgid condition, forcing a quantity of them into the xylem vessel and through the upward movement into the stem. Okay, just the next diagram, let's try to see out here. Epidermis, then soil particle, root hair. You see this is the cortex. Okay, this one is the endodermis, phloem, metaxylem, protoxylem. Okay, xylem tissue. Now what will happen when this root hair is absorbing the water? You see the direction of this water. Okay, these are all the arrow mark shown out here, the water moving inside. Each one of the root hair absorbing the water. Okay, just imagine number of root hairs from the other direction also absorbs the water and directs it into the xylem tissue. That means enormous root hairs absorbs the water and direct into the xylem tissue. This results in a pressure, and this pressure is only called as which pressure? It is called as root pressure. Okay, so root pressure is the pressure exerted by the cells of the cortex. Each cells of this cortex, okay, they exert a pressure on the xylem. Okay, cortex of the root upon the liquid content under fully turgid condition. Each cell has to be turgid in nature. Each cell become turgid because each root hair they absorb the water and minerals, forcing a quantity of them. That means all these turgid cell forces the water where it forces the cell, it forces the water into the which tissue? Xylem vessels. Okay, and through upward movement, then finally from the xylem tissue what will happen? The water is put upward into the upper part of the plant body. So this is how the plant absorb water and minerals. Okay, so here this is the passage of water molecule from the soil into the root hair cells to xylem. That means one root hair, number of cells are there, each cells become turgid, and due to that the water is directed into the xylem tissue. Okay, thank you very much. We have finished the third chapter. See you next time. Thank you. लामो गयो भाइ.
My dear students, our today's topic is lever of the same chapter, machine. Last time I discussed about the machine, principle of machine, and then various factors, various ratios like mechanical advantage, velocity ratio and efficiency. So today our topic is lever. What is a lever? We say a lever is a straight or a bent rigid bar which is capable of rotation about a point. Anything which is straight, any rigid bar which is straight or bent and which can be rotated about a point is called a lever. A lever works on the principle of moments, about which we have discussed in chapter number 1. Principle of moment says the total anti-clockwise moment and total clockwise moments are equal. But in short, here we say principle of lever is principle of lever is principle of moments, according to which we write here load into load arm is equal to effort into effort arm. If question comes in ICC like this, what is the principle of a lever, or name the principle of the lever, we can say the principle of the lever is the moment of force, principle of moments of force, according to which load into load arm is equal to effort into effort arm. If we say only this much, load into load arm equal to effort into effort arm, is also well and good. So now from here we find mechanical advantage of a lever by this method. Let us write symbolically load. I write L, load arm I will be writing that is LA, effort I write E, and effort arm I write here EA. LA stands for load arm, EA stands for effort arm. We will continue little further. We write load by effort is equal to effort arm by the load arm. And as we know from the ratio of the machine, terms related to a machine, load by effort ratio is called mechanical advantage. So this becomes mechanical advantage, and here we will be writing here EA by LA. This becomes the formula of mechanical advantage of a lever. EA means effort arm by load arm. Then what is the formula of mechanical advantage of a lever? We say that mechanical advantage of a lever equal to effort arm by the load arm. So this becomes the formula for the mechanical advantage of a lever. Now there are three types of lever. There are three categories of levers. We say class 1 lever, class 2 lever, and class 3 lever. In every lever we will have fulcrum. One side will keep the effort and one side will keep the load, and the load is overcome by the effort. So there are, on the basis of the position of the fulcrum, effort and the load, there are three kinds of lever: class 1, class 2 and class 3. So let us see the types of lever. Let's say there are three types of levers: class 1, class 2 and class 3. 1, 2 and 3. Three types of lever we have: class 1, class 2 and class 3. So in short, we remember this way: we write here F, here we write L, here we write E. That means the sequence becomes flea. Class 1 lever is the lever in which fulcrum is situated in between the load and effort. Class 2 lever is the lever in which load is situated in between fulcrum and the effort. And class 3 lever is the lever in which effort is situated between the fulcrum and the load. So let us see class 1 levers example. Class 1 lever will be having fulcrum in between load and the effort. This is class 1 lever. Fulcrum will be situated anywhere in between the load and the effort. What are the example of class 1 lever? We'll check that. Class 1 levers example is seesaw, beam balance, scissors, pliers, shears, hand pump, crowbar, claw hammer, fishing rod, catapult, etc. There can be many examples for class 1 lever. In class 1 lever, the fulcrum is situated in between. Seesaw, you all must have seen seesaw. Seesaw will have the fulcrum exactly in between out there, like this. Seesaw will have fulcrum, one side is load, one side is the one child sits, another side, another child sits. So fulcrum is situated between the load and the effort. Beam balance also you must have seen. Beam balance, the fulcrum is exactly midway, one side is the load, one side is the effort. Then scissors will also have the fulcrum in between. Scissors is like this, you all must have seen it. Here is the fulcrum, Here is the effort we give, and here we keep the load. So fulcrum is situated in between. To cut some piece of paper or clothes and all, that means load and piece of paper and all are the example, are the loads, which is cut by applying an effort through the handle, and there is a blade to cut it. Pliers, you all must have seen pliers. Also example of class 1 lever. Shears also is used to cut metal sheet and all. To cut metal sheet we use shears, is also an example of class 1 lever. Hand pump is also an example of class 1 lever. Crowbar, also an example of class 1. What is crowbar? Crowbar is a long rod which is bent at the tip. Fulcrum is here. Here we will be keeping the load, and here we will give the effort to overcome the load. Claw hammer to take out nail and all. So fulcrum is situated. You can see the diagram is given in the book as well. Claw hammer, you all must have seen. The nail is the load, and the fulcrum is situated there, and through the handle we will be applying the effort to take out the nail. Fishing rod will have the fulcrum at the end here at the tip. Fish is the load, and through one side we are giving the effort. Catapult, here is a catapult. In catapult, the fulcrum is over here, the effort is out here. This way we are holding the wooden part of the catapult, that is the effort, and here is the load which we are releasing. This is also the example of class 1 lever. Fulcrum is situated between the load and the effort. There can be many other examples as well. So in our human body we make use of all three classes of levers. So class 1 lever example in human body is nodding our head. When we nod our head, this is class 1 lever. How? Face is the load, in between the neck bone is there, so that is the fulcrum, and from the back side we are giving the effort to nod our head. So also the example of class 1 lever. There can be many examples. While we are rowing a boat like this, way, fulcrum is situated here, the load is water, and through one side we are giving the effort like this. So it's also class 1 lever. So they may give a situation and they may ask you to decide which class lever they are. So you can think about the position of the fulcrum, load and the effort. Accordingly you think which class lever the particular thing is belonging to. Now here let us check the mechanical advantage of class 1 lever. Mechanical advantage. If fulcrum is situated exactly midway out here, like that happens in case of a beam balance, and it happens again in case of a seesaw. If it is exactly in between, so effort arm will be this much. All the arms will find from the fulcrum. The distance of the effort from the fulcrum is effort arm. Distance of the load from the fulcrum is called load arm. That means this is your effort arm. And this side is our load arm. You will find that if it is exactly midway, then effort arm and the load arm are of equal values. Then formula of mechanical advantage, we have got effort arm by the load arm, and both of them are equal, then answer will come 1. So mechanical advantage of beam balance or seesaw is 1. That means that in that case the class 1 lever will behave as force equalizer. So it is balancing the force, balancing the load, and the effort will be of equal value. But if the class 1 lever is having fulcrum situated closer to the load, that means effort arm will become longer. Effort arm is this much now, and the load arm will become shorter here like this. Now effort arm is longer and the load arm is shorter. That means your answer will come greater than 1 in that case. In that case it will come greater than 1 when effort arm is longer than the load arm. What can be the practical example for such case? We have the example pliers. Pliers has got long handle and a short mouth, short blade. Long handle means effort arm is from the fulcrum, effort arm is longer and the load arm is shorter. Even the shears will have is the kind of scissor only to cut a metal sheet and all, to cut heavy load. It has got a long handle and a short blade. Like grass cutter, it's got long handle and a short blade. So long handle means effort arm is longer than the load arm. So in that case, mechanical advantage will be greater than 1 and it will act as a force multiplier. So in that case, this will act as a force multiplier. Force multiplier. When the effort arm is longer than the load arm. And if fulcrum is situated closer to the effort, somewhere here, closer to the effort, then effort arm is this much and the load arm is this much. So effort arm is shorter and the load arm is longer. Then mechanical advantage in that case will become less than 1. That time it will act as a speed multiplier. Speed multiplier. That happens in case of a scissor. Scissor has got a short handle and a long blade. The short handle means the effort arm will be shorter and the load arm will be longer. So it will cut the load faster, it will cut the piece of cloth or the piece of paper much faster than a shears or than a pliers. Even the jack handle, which is used to change the tire in case a car and all gets punctured, the jack is provided with a long handle. It's also an example of class 1 lever. Long handle, the effort arm is longer and the load arm is shorter. So it is a force multiplier. We are lifting heavy load but by applying much less effort. One year in ICC they had asked this question. Though scissors and the shears both belong to class 1 lever, but how they are different from each other? In what respect they are different from each other? We say that scissors is the class 1 lever with the mechanical advantage less than 1 and it acts as a speed multiplier. Whereas shears is a class 1 lever whose mechanical advantage is greater than 1 and that acts as a force multiplier. So that is the difference. Metal sheet and all quite heavy, quite strong. So to cut it, we use less effort by using a long handle and a short blade. It will cut it slowly, but it will cut a heavy thing, heavy load. Whereas scissors will cut the load which is much lighter but much faster it's cutting. So that is the difference between the two of them. So class 1 lever has all the three possibilities. It can have mechanical advantage equal to 1, it can have mechanical advantage even greater than 1, it can have mechanical advantage even less than 1. So it all three possibility a class 1 lever can have. So now let us see what is class 2 lever. Before that, 1 year they had asked this question. Suppose class 1 lever is given in this format like this. Effort arm and the load arm are equal. So mechanical advantage is 1. How can we make it act as a force multiplier or how can we increase its mechanical advantage? So without changing the position of the load and the effort, if they say that, so our answer will be by shifting the fulcrum towards the load. If you shift the fulcrum towards the load, effort arm becomes longer than the load arm and mechanical advantage will become more than 1. So it will act as a force multiplier. We can just give a suggestion that by shifting the fulcrum towards the load. So this type of question also you can expect in ICC. Now you see what is class 2 lever. So class 2 lever, as I have written in the beginning only, class 2 lever will have load in between the fulcrum and the effort. So let us draw just a schematic diagram here. Load will be anywhere in between. Load is here, one side will keep fulcrum, one side will apply the effort. So load in between is called class 2 lever. What are the example of this class lever? Example of this class lever is nutcracker, wheelbarrow, door, bottle opener, etc. You must have seen nutcracker. So nutcracker, we keep the nut in between. One side is the fulcrum. I am sure nutcracker diagram, if you see, it is somewhat like this. Nut, this is nut we keep here in between the arms. This is the fulcrum here. One side will be applying the effort to crack it. So here is the load. Load is the nut which we are cracking. So fulcrum, load is in between effort and the fulcrum. Wheelbarrow, the trolley, or the, you must have seen wheelbarrow or the trolley bag and all, we are dragging it. Fulcrum is in one side. Load is in between, and through the handle we are pulling it this way, so we are giving the effort over here. This is also a class 2 lever. Doors has got handle there, and the weight of the door is the load which is situated in the center of gravity in between, and the one side is the fulcrum which is the hinge. Is also the class 2 lever. Bottle openers, you all must have seen it. So it has got a round tip there, and which we clamp with the cap, and one side we are giving the effort. The cap is the load and fulcrum is right on the other side. From the other side we are giving effort to open it. So they all are example of class 2 levers. So any situation they give, so we think and see the position of what lies in between, that will decide which class lever that particular thing is belonging to. So this is example of class 2 lever. Now we'll check the mechanical advantage of class 2 lever. Mechanical advantage. So you will find in this case, load arm is, this is load arm, and effort arm is the whole thing. Whole thing is the effort arm, from fulcrum till the effort. This whole thing is the effort arm. Effort arm is this long and load arm is this much. So you will always find the effort arm always greater than the load arm. So mechanical advantage will always be greater than 1. That means it always acts as a force multiplier. That means class 2 lever always will be overcoming a heavier load by applying much less effort. So it's always a force multiplier. What is the reason why mechanical advantage of class 2 lever is always greater than 1? Because its effort arm is always greater than the load arm. We'll give this answer. Which class lever has its mechanical advantage always greater than 1? The answer is class 2 lever. And why so? Because its effort arm is always longer than the load arm. So one question again they may ask you, how can you increase its mechanical advantage? How can we increase it further? By shifting the load towards the fulcrum. If the load is coming towards the fulcrum, load arm becomes even smaller than before. That means your effort arm will be much longer than the load arm. So the mechanical advantage will increase. That means you will be giving much less effort in that case and overcome a much heavier load. Or maybe the same load you are overcoming, but by giving less effort. That is class 2 lever. Now see what is class 3 lever. As I have written already, class 3 lever will have effort in between. Effort lies in between fulcrum and the load. Class 1 lever is the lever in which fulcrum lies in between. Class 2 is the lever in which load lies in between, and class 3 lever is the lever in which effort lies in between the load and the fulcrum. So what are the example of class 3 lever? The example of class 3 lever is knife. We have foot treadle or foot pump. Then we have spoon, forks, stapler, tongs, any kind of tongs, fire tongs or maybe sugar tongs, lemon crusher, etc. They all are example of class 3 lever. I think knife, which part of the knife do we press? We press the middle part of the knife in order to cut something. Foot pump we will use to fill, we are using it to fill air. So which part of the pump we press? We press the middle part of it. I think stapler is very common, stapling part. One side is the fulcrum, this side is the fulcrum, and you press the middle part of it. This way you press and then staple something. Then spoon, the middle part of the spoon we hold and then we stir any liquid like this. This is also class 3 lever. Tongs, fire tongs and all. So we are using to lift something, or there maybe a piece of coal, or maybe a cube of ice, or maybe a cube of sugar block. By using tong, by applying the effort somewhere in between. Lemon crusher also, we press the central part of it in order to crush the lemon. So they all are example of class 3 lever. So in class 3 lever, you can see here also your effort arm is this much, effort to fulcrum distance. Effort arm is here, and the load arm is this whole thing. This entire thing is the load arm. Load arm is from here to here. So mechanical advantage you will always find, you will see that effort arm is always shorter than the load arm. So mechanical advantage will always be less than 1. That means this class lever will always behave as a speed multiplier machine, speed multiplier. So such class lever is used to gain in the speed. So we will give more effort, but we are gaining in the speed. So anything, any load we can overcome, or anything, if we want to cut faster, so we will go for class 3 lever. Even stapling part, we can staple many things much faster by using class 3 lever. We are giving the effort in between or there. So this class lever has mechanical advantage always less than 1, and the reason for this, why to have a mechanical advantage always less than 1, is that the effort arm is always shorter than the load arm. This is the reason. So there are 3 class levers: class 1, class 2 and class 3. So depending upon the diagrams and all given, so we decide what class of lever they are. Or even human arm, I forgot about that. Human arm is also example of human arm is also an example of class 3 lever. Even class 2 levers example in our body, human body, is we are lifting a load by using our toes this way. So we are keeping the load in out here somewhere in between, and from the toes we are giving the ankle is the fulcrum, we are lifting it this way. So that is the example of class 2 lever. An example of class 3 lever is our human arm, or even the folded hand. So here is the fulcrum, here is the effort and load we are holding in our hand over here like this. This is also the example of class 3 lever. Entire human, or at the time of bowling and all, when we bowl, then this is the fulcrum, we are giving the effort from the biceps over here, and then we got the ball in our hand, or maybe a piece of stone which we are throwing as a load. So your effort lies in between. So we are gaining in the space. This is an example of class 3 lever. So we have 3 classes lever. If question comes, which class lever can have mechanical advantage equal to 1, even less than 1, or even more than 1? So answer is class 1 lever. Which class lever is mechanical advantage always greater than 1? We say class 2 lever. And which class lever has the mechanical advantage always less than 1? We say class 3 lever. So, and reason also we know, in class 2 lever mechanical advantage is greater than 1 because effort arm is always longer than the load arm. And in class 3 lever mechanical advantage is less than 1 because its effort arm is always shorter than the load arm. So this was the topic lever from the chapter machine, which we finished today. So in the next class I will discuss about the pulleys and the diagrams of pulleys and all. Thank you.